Elizabeth Holmes's life is an absolute mess, and it doesn't look to be getting better anytime soon. Holmes had one of the most spectacular rises, followed by one of the most spectacular downfalls of all time. Her company Theranos is one of the most well-known scams of recent years, and once was heralded as revolutionary, but in reality it was nothing more than lies and smokescreens. Theranos just a few years ago was worth almost $10 billion, but today it's worth less than zero. The story of Holmes and Theranos was shown in the TV show The Dropout, the documentary on HBO, The Inventor, and countless YouTube videos. So by now, most people know the story of Elizabeth Holmes, Sunny Balwani, and Theranos. But in the case of The Dropout and The Inventor, these shows and documentaries were put together before the end of the story had actually happened. So today we're going to go over what happened after Theranos fell, what happened to Holmes and Balwani, how they still haven't admitted any wrongdoing or remorse, what was the results of both of their trials, the craziness that has continued, including some wild stories you may not have heard, and why in the next few months the two of them may finally be getting what they deserve. So we're going to pick up in 2018 just to give you a bit of a refresher of where we are. John Carreyrou had published his article in the Wall Street Journal in October 2015, and then 2016 we saw big things like Sunny being forced out, Elizabeth Holmes' net worth was revised to zero, Walgreens, Safeway, all of these places ended their partnerships, and also some investors started to sue Holmes and Theranos. And at the end of 2016, Walgreens actually sued her as well. The following year in 2017, they closed all their testing centers, they laid off the majority of their remaining workforce, and in 2018, March 2018, the SEC finally charged Holmes, Balwani, and Theranos with deceiving investors by massive fraud and what they described as an elaborate years-long fraud. They claimed that Holmes, Balwani, and Theranos exaggerated or falsely claimed the accuracy of their company's blood testing technology, and Holmes settled these charges by paying $500,000 in a fine, returning 18.9 million shares to the company, relinquishing her voting control of Theranos, and being barred from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 10 years. On June 15, 2018, following an investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office that lasted more than 2 years, a federal grand jury indicted Holmes and Balwani on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Both pleaded not guilty, and prosecutors alleged that Holmes and Balwani engaged in 2 criminal schemes, one to defraud investors and the other to defraud doctors and patients. After the indictment was issued, Holmes stepped down as CEO of Theranos but remained chair of the board. A man named David Taylor took over as CEO, but Theranos only lasted 3 more months, and in September 2018, Theranos officially dissolved. In 2019, it was reported that Holmes and Balwani were looking at a defense strategy of blaming the media. In particular, they wanted to blame journalist John Carreyrou. His book had come out the previous year, Bad Blood, and it came out to fantastic reviews. People thought the investigation that he did was amazing, and they really gave him credit for bringing Theranos down. But Holmes and Balwani looked at this as Carreyrou apparently manipulated the media, and it certainly wasn't the fact that Holmes and Balwani had lied about their technology. It really was, just made up stories according to them. So when Holmes and Balwani were blaming John Carreyrou for the downfall of the company, their trials were actually together, but shortly after this, their trials were severed, and this is when Holmes started to blame Balwani for abusing and controlling her, and she tried to introduce evidence that showed he was controlling how she dressed, how much money she could spend, who she interacted with, and she said he was essentially dominating her. In October 2019, it was reported that Holmes's legal team was pursuing a civil case as they wanted the court to allow them to stop representing Holmes, stating that she had not paid them for services in over a year. And, quote, given Miss Holmes's current financial situation, we have no expectation that Miss Holmes will ever pay for our services as her counsel, end quote. In November 2019, the judge allowed them to withdraw and Holmes got new legal representation. In February 2020, Holmes's defense requested a federal court to drop all charges against her. This was not done, unsurprisingly. The case was postponed several times over the course of 2020 due to the COVID pandemic, and it was also postponed because Holmes was pregnant with her first child. Several charges were added and dropped. Holmes was at one stage considering a mental disease as a defense strategy, and Holmes and Balwani were also accused by the government of destroying evidence in Theranos' final few days of business. The case finally began on August 31st, 2021. The trial had dozens of witnesses and was highly publicized in the media. People would get up every day and line up at 5 a.m. in hopes of getting a seat in the court. Evidence was provided that Holmes faked product demonstrations, falsified validation reports, was misleading about claims, and overstated financials. There was audio and video evidence of Holmes making inflated or misleading claims about Theranos. Holmes admitted she forged documents saying Pfizer and other companies had validated the company's blood testing technology. As many people, including myself, suspected, Holmes took the stand in her own defense for 7 days. The majority of the time, she deflected blame on others, and while she said there were failings, she did not take the ultimate responsibility nor show remorse, and I do think this really played a big role in her sentencing, that she didn't show remorse, but more on that in a minute. She sold the jury on a vision of a future at Theranos, saying it was not a crime to be optimistic about the possibilities of the technology that she herself was misled about by her own expert staff. Holmes said that Balwani sought control over her during their romantic relationship, which was still ongoing when the alleged criminal acts took place, and at times berated and abused her. However, she also testified that Balwani had not forced her to make false statements to investors, business partners, journalists, and company directors. Prosecutors argued her culpability crossed into fraud when she lied about the accuracy, types, and numbers of tests Theranos machines could do. During closing arguments, one of the attorneys said, quote, "At so many forks in the road, she chose the dishonest path," end quote. On January 3rd, 2020, Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors, 3 counts of wire fraud, and 1 conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She was not found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding patients. The jury returned a no verdict on 3 counts of wire fraud against investors, and the judge declared a mistrial on those 3 counts. Just over 2 months later, Balwani was also found guilty, but Balwani was found guilty of all 12 charges he was tried for. Holmes and Balwani were both allowed to remain out on a $500,000 bond while they awaited sentencing. Both of their sentencing was pushed several times throughout 2022 as they both tried everything they could to forego prison. Holmes and Balwani are both still living in California mansions, enjoying the very best of lifestyles. At the end of 2022, Holmes was sentenced to 11.25 years in prison, and Balwani was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Holmes must surrender by April 27th, and Balwani must surrender by March 15th. Holmes' sentencing date was slightly postponed because she is currently pregnant with her 2nd child. Currently, Holmes is trying to throw everything she can at the wall, hoping something sticks so she doesn't have to go to prison. She's currently trying to appeal, and she wants to be able to stay out of prison while she's appealing. She's heavily pregnant with her 2nd child, and she is trying to get the judge to agree to let her just live her normal lifestyle while she's appealing over the next year or so. She doesn't want to surrender on April 27th, obviously. Holmes is currently residing in a California mansion with her partner, Billy Evans, who is heir to a hotel fortune. Elizabeth and Evans have one son, and she is currently pregnant with her second child. Billy Evans and other friends and family of Holmes wrote to the judge hoping that she wouldn't get any prison time, and included lots of pictures of the fancy lifestyle that they're living. It was recently revealed that Holmes may have tried to flee the country last January after she was found guilty. She had booked a one-way ticket to Mexico, claiming that she was going to a friend's wedding if she was found innocent. I go into more details of this in my recent video talking about it, which I will link in the cards and the description box down below. So Sunny Balwani must surrender in just under a month, and Elizabeth Holmes must surrender in just over 2 months. Will this finally be the end to this 2 decades long story of one of the wildest things that ever happened? It's so crazy, and I know that there's still so many people fascinated by this case, and apparently there's still movies being worked on, and I would really love to see the movie version of Bad Blood, because although The Dropout was very good, I think Bad Blood is just, there's a lot more to sink your teeth into, and it's just such a great book. I highly recommend it if you haven't. There's so many details that you could never possibly put in a video because it would just be too long. So definitely check out Bad Blood if you haven't. Check out The Dropout if you haven't. And I have a ton of videos on here going over all aspects of theranos, so check those out too. And if you could subscribe and like the video, I would really appreciate it, as I'm trying to get this little second channel going. So thank you so much for your time, and as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.